never mind. Right, well, as you can see, here's a map of Manchester down to Garonne, which is where that red blob is. And hidden away deep in France, at a village called Temple-sur-Lot, is Latour-Mailiac, I think I'm pronouncing it right, which is a garden which has remarkable world status. I've never heard of it, never knew anything about it. But you know, when you go and stay somewhere, they have all these little leaflets telling you where you can visit. And it said it was a garden where the first coloured water lilies were developed, this beautiful place, Latour Marliac. And here, colourful water lilies were developed. The only water lilies that we actually had in Europe that were hardy were white ones, which were actually very, very beautiful. And Latour Marliac, who was the man who developed this nursery, decided that he wanted to develop some colourful water lilies. And exotic water lilies are all sorts of different colours. So he spent years developing these, creating hybrids, creating further hybrids. And he opened in 1875. And finally, in 1889, he decided that he could show the world what he'd done. And this is an exotic, this is an Egyptian water lily, a blue water lily. All these photos I took while I was there. It's absolutely beautiful. Anyway, he exhibited at the Great Exhibition. Well, actually, it was the World Fair in Paris in 1889. And that was the World Fair where the Eiffel Tower was opened and exhibited. So it was a really big occasion. And there were water gardens in the Trocadero, which is near the Tuileries. And Latour Marliac filled them with his colourful water lilies, and they were an absolute sensation. Let's have the next picture. There's a different coloured one, and they were all, you could buy them there, but obviously you can't bring them home to England. Anyway, it just so happened that a certain artist whose studio was nearby, you can guess who that must have been. Who was it? Nobody's answered.
Monet. Monet.
Yes, Claude Monet. His studios were nearby, and he visited the gardens and he saw these water lilies and was just completely bowled over by them. And at that time, he was renting his house in Giverny, which is just off the Seine. And he decided to buy the house and create his own water gardens. He had to get permission because he had to divert water from the Seine into his water gardens. And he bought hundreds of lilies and lotus, which we'll talk about later, to fill the gardens. And actually, when we visited Latour Marliac nurseries, they actually have the ledgers with all his orders in them. It was really interesting, if only one could read the French, but there you go. So he created his famous bridge, and underneath are all these beautiful, colourful water lilies that he placed in his ponds there. And as you know, probably his most famous water lily paintings are these at the Orangerie in Paris. Has anybody visited? I've been a couple of times.
Yes.
Well, the rooms were actually created for these paintings because they're meters and meters long, and they're absolutely fantastic. And the rooms are oval in shape, you know, like the shape of the bench in the center. And it was so sad because it took so long to build that by the time they were actually exhibited, he died. I think that's so sad, but you can go and visit it. It's wonderful. There's several rooms just of these paintings. He was obviously a bit obsessed with water lilies. I don't know, where am I up to?
He was a bit ahead of his time, wasn't he, there? It's real immersive art, that, isn't it? Sort of.
Yeah. And they're very tall. I mean, it's hard really to gain the perspective, but they are really tall and really long. And he had, I think it was 3 or 4 studios at Giverny where he put these together. But I imagine there seems to be a join, doesn't there, on that one? But he was just completely obsessed with these lilies. But the colours grew darker and darker as he got older. And people think that he had cataracts, so he wasn't actually seeing the colours as they were. Anyway, I can't remember what the next. This is, I've just got a few pictures of water lilies, the different colours that were actually developed from a white one and from the exotic ones. But the exotic ones that are there now, they have to take in for the winter because they can't survive in the climate, apart from the hardy ones that he managed to develop. And look at the bees were absolutely smothering them. It was wonderful to behold. And water lilies, their leaf has a sort of notch in it. And look, that's another Egyptian, well, it's a hybrid from an Egyptian water lily. You can see why Monet was obsessed with them, can't you? They're just really, really beautiful. And there's another, those peach ones I love. I didn't take any photos of the yellow ones. Aren't they beautiful?
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
They look like they've got a light underneath them, especially some of the other colours, not so much that one, but actually look like they've got like a light bulb in them and they're lit from within.
Yeah, that one's a good example of that, isn't it? It's really, and there's that one. And this was the original Latour Marliac. This was where he developed them. And see those little pots? They're sort of typical pots of that region. And that was where, when they were first developing, the babies grew in those, and then they were transplanted out into these beds. It's absolutely beautiful. Typical French, everything is always arranged beautifully. And that is the original part. And then at the back, there's a house, presumably someone lives in. And they've now got a small museum with the history of the garden and some of Monet's orders. And but they send their lilies all over the world. It wasn't just him. It's some famous female British gardener, didn't write her name down. She got all her water lilies from here. They've now got a cafe and a restaurant at the side. And that's a bit of a close-up. And so it was just beautiful. It was just a bit hot. It was a bit hot.
Can you walk all those pathways?
Yes, you can walk. We went quite early in the morning. It had only opened as we were leaving. It got quite crowded. It's obviously, well, it's somewhere to visit when you're on holiday, isn't it? But and there are the things that really just, I've never seen them before. Those are lotus flowers. People call them water lilies, but they're a different genus. They're called Nelumba, whereas water lilies are Nymphea, which Monet called his paintings, didn't he? And the difference between them is that water lilies sit on the water, whereas lotus flowers grow up out of the water. And their leaves, I think they're a bit like giant nasturtium leaves, but they are just, I just, couldn't get enough of those really. And that's a picture of the gardens as they are now. And all these are water lily beds with different types of water lilies developing in them and all different colours. It's stunning. And then that is an opening lotus, which we'll talk about. And just look at that. I mean, the centre looks to me as if it's something plastic, like a watering can top. And the seeds develop inside that little pod. And there's some growing.
Amazing.
And they're huge. They're absolutely huge. They're beautiful. And that's a close-up.
Wow.
You can see. Just wonderful, aren't they? Just wonderful. But the interesting thing was Monet's first order, he ordered water lilies and he also ordered lotus. But in the end, he rejected the lotus flowers. It doesn't say why, but I think it's because he liked the lilies sitting on the water, you know, and the effect rather than these enormously tall, because these can grow up to 5 feet tall. And I think perhaps he preferred the others because he rejected them and got rid of them all, which I think was a bit sad, really.
They're not as colourful as the others, are they?
No, there's these white ones and this gorgeous pink, and some were white and they just had a little pink, vaguely pink rim around the edge, but I haven't got a photo of those. I think Dave might have. They're fascinating, aren't they? Just absolutely fascinating. I did a video, but I didn't think I'd be able to show it, so I've just taken one shot of that bed. I just think, I don't know, look how that cone sticks up. It looks like plastic. And their seeds, they can germinate up to 200 years. I don't know how they know that, but they can lie in the mud and just germinate. And water lilies and lotus flowers are one of the oldest flowering plants on earth, some millions and millions of years. And they're also edible. All their parts are edible. So there you go. You can grow them as vegetables in your garden. I'm just seeing, oh, right. In 1990, now the connection with Stapley Water Gardens was in 1991, the people who ran Stapley Water Gardens bought the nursery because the nursery was in danger of closing down because of finances. It wasn't open to the public then. And they thought they were going to have to finish production. And so the people from Stapley Water Gardens bought it because that's where they got their water lilies from. And they revamped it and built those extra beds. And they also opened it to the public, and they extended the gardens, and they built a replica of Monet's Japanese bridge over the water. I must say it doesn't look as good as the one at Japanese. And they then opened the restaurant because they felt if visitors were coming and paying, that would help the financial situation there, which meant that it kept it open. But unfortunately, in 2007, it was then bought by an American who was naturalized Frenchman because Stapley Water Gardens closed, didn't it? And they were in financial problems, and so they had to sell it. They couldn't keep it up. But now it's run by this Frenchman, and it's a very popular tourist attraction, so it's doing quite well. So that, I thought that was quite interesting. It's and you can order them from there, but I don't know how you get them home.
Here at the Chicago Botanic Garden, and we're standing here today in my garden, the Heritage Garden. We have one really exciting plant that's starting to come into bloom. The plant is one of our aquatics from the tropics. It's the Victoria water lily. The plant has two very distinct features to it, one of which we see all the time, which is the leaves or the lily pads. The lily pads are very large, buoyant leaves. The largest in the world have gotten up to about 9 feet across, and they resemble a large platter because they have a rim that circles the outside rim of the leaf. It's also very distinctive because underneath the plant they have very sharp 1-inch needles which are sharp enough to penetrate even a car tire, they say. The other unique feature about this plant, which is why we're here today, is the bloom. The Victoria water lily does not bloom very often for us, and when it does bloom, it only blooms for 2 nights. On the first night, the water lily is open in a very white color. It has a very tuberose scent to it, and that is done to attract its pollinators back in its native habitat. On the second night, the white water lily turns pink, and it begins to complete its life cycle. By the following morning after it turns pink, it has completed its life cycle and it begins to recede back into the water. The other interesting thing about the flower is that when it's white on its first night, it is actually a female flower, And on the next night, when it turns pink, it actually transforms itself into a male flower. We hope that you'll get a chance to come out and see these very unique plants. We're hopeful to see one more bloom yet this season. If you do have a chance to come out, take a quick look at it, because it'll probably be gone tomorrow.
I think that's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
It seems that oh, do you know there's a photo missing from my thing? I wonder if I can find it. That is actually Victoria, but it's not the Victoria he had, because recently they've discovered that this one in Bolivia, which is where most of these giant ones come from, this one is actually a slightly different species. And these lily pads can be 3 meters across, which was what he was talking about the one that he'd got. And they're actually fertilized by scarab beetles. And what he mentioned, the aroma, that this is the same process. It's a white flower and it exudes this amazing aroma that scarab beetles actually love. So they crawl down and it's sticky inside, so they can't get out. And then at night, the flower closes up and they're struggling around, but they've got pollen from a previous one, which then fertilizes the female organ part of the plant. And then the whole flower sinks under the water. And the following evening, it emerges and it's then changed sex and it's pink and the petals unfurl and the scarab beetles struggle and struggle, and in their struggle they get covered in pollen, finally escape and go on to the next flower. What a strange life. You know, that's all they're there for, having sex with these flowers. But just look at the lily pads, aren't they amazing?
If you think you could stand on them, I wonder if you could stand on them.
They take the weight of a child. Yes, a child can sit in one. The ones at Kew Gardens, I don't know, has anybody seen them? They're absolutely enormous. And I saw a picture of a toddler sitting on one. Yeah. And aren't they clever? I mean, they've got an edge to stop the water going over them and sinking. And well, as I said before, they're one of the oldest and first flowering plants. Phenomenal.
Amazing.
They just really bowled me over when I saw them. And the lotus, or the water lily, they're national symbols for a lot of countries, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Egypt. And the symbol of it is resurrection. And you can see why, because the flowers sink down and then they come back the next day. They only flower for 2 days, 2.5 days, and purity. And they find in ancient Egypt, on the buildings, there's lots and lots of drawings of water lilies. And then my very last picture is, oh God, where is it? I went out this morning to try and photograph mine, but they're not flowering. And because we've been away, the garden has just taken off. But you can see a bud. Mine are pink with yellow centres. Anyway, there you go. That's me and water lilies. And they were just gorgeous. Just absolutely gorgeous.
Well, Jackie,
well, thank you for listening to my... yeah.
And
thank you, Bernard. Thank you very much.